At 2:30 p.m. on March 4, 1918, the USS Cyclops sat anchored in Carlisle Bay, Barbados, waiting for clearance to depart. The collier was 542 feet long, displaced 9,030 tons fully loaded, and carried the largest crew of any auxiliary vessel in the United States Navy. 306 men, 10 officers, 236 enlisted sailors, 57 passengers, 3 stowaways discovered after departure from Rio de Janeiro. The ship was carrying 10,800 tons of manganese ore, a critical material for steel production. America needed that manganese. The war in Europe was consuming steel faster than factories could produce it. Every week of delay meant fewer artillery shells, fewer rifles, fewer ships for the Allied war effort. Captain George Worley stood on the bridge watching dock workers complete the final loading. He was 54 years old, German-born, originally named Johann Friedrich Georg Wickmann before immigrating to America in 1878. He changed his name to sound less German. Smart decision. In 1918, anything German was suspicious. He'd served in the Navy for 28 years, the last 3 as commander of the Cyclops. His crew hated him, not disliked, hated. Worley was paranoid, possibly insane, definitely drunk most of the time. He wore his Navy uniform jacket with civilian pajama bottoms while on duty. He carried a walking stick everywhere and used it to beat sailors who displeased him. He locked men in the brig for minor infractions like failing to salute quickly enough. 3 sailors had deserted in Rio rather than continue serving under him. The Navy knew about Worley's problems. Multiple officers had filed complaints. Nothing was done. The Navy needed experienced captains. War was depleting the officer corps faster than Annapolis could replace them. So Worley kept his command despite being manifestly unfit for it. At 3:45 p.m., harbor officials cleared the Cyclops for departure. The ship's engines rumbled to life. The Cyclops used 2 steam engines generating 7,500 horsepower total, not particularly powerful for a ship this size. Maximum speed was 15 knots in calm seas, slower when fully loaded. Lieutenant Commander John Borum, the executive officer, reported to the bridge. "Sir, starboard engine is running rough. Chief engineer recommends we delay departure for repairs." Worley stared at him. "We're 3 days behind schedule. The Navy needs this manganese yesterday. We sail now." "Sir, if the engine fails at sea, then we sail on 1 engine." Dismissed. Borum left the bridge. He'd learned not to argue with Worley. The captain's paranoia had worsened over the past month. He'd accused 3 officers of being German spies. He'd ordered random searches of crew quarters looking for sabotage equipment. He'd caught 2 sailors playing cards and had them flogged. The ship's morale was catastrophic. At 4:20 p.m., the Cyclops cleared Carlisle Bay and turned northwest toward Baltimore, 1,900 nautical miles away. The route would take them through the Caribbean, past the Bahamas, then north along the American coast. Estimated travel time, 6 days at 13 knots average speed. Arrival in Baltimore, March 10th. The weather was clear, light winds from the southeast, sea state calm, perfect conditions for the voyage. The Cyclops moved steadily through blue water, leaving Barbados behind. By 6 o'clock, the island had disappeared below the horizon. The ship was alone in open ocean, no other vessels visible in any direction. This was normal. The Caribbean had become increasingly dangerous since America entered the war. German U-boats operated in these waters. They'd sunk 23 Allied ships in the Caribbean since January. The Cyclops was theoretically safe. Colliers weren't military targets. The ship carried ore, not weapons. But German submarines didn't always follow international law. Sometimes they sank civilian vessels without warning. Lieutenant Borum ordered extra lookouts posted. 4 men on the bow, 2 on the stern, 2 in the crow's nest, all watching for periscopes. The Cyclops had no defensive weapons, no deck guns, no depth charges. If a U-boat attacked, the ship's only defense was to radio for help and hope Allied warships arrived before the submarine torpedoed them. At 8:30 p.m., Chief Engineer Lawrence approached the bridge. He looked worried. "Sir, the starboard engine is overheating. Cylinder temperatures are 40 degrees above normal. We need to shut it down and inspect the cooling system." Worley was eating dinner in his cabin. Borum made the decision. "Shut it down. Run on the port engine until we can assess the damage." The starboard engine went offline at 8:47 p.m. The Cyclops immediately slowed to 9 knots. At this speed, the voyage to Baltimore would take 8 days instead of 6. They'd arrive on March 12th, 2 days late. The Navy would be furious, but arriving late was better than suffering a catastrophic engine failure mid-ocean. Lawrence spent 3 hours inspecting the starboard engine. He found the problem at 11:50 p.m. The cooling system's main pump had partially failed. Metal shavings in the coolant indicated bearing wear. The pump could be repaired, but it would take 12 hours of work. Lawrence reported this to Borum. Borum went to Worley's cabin. The captain was drinking whiskey. 3 empty bottles sat on his desk. Worley looked at Borum with unfocused eyes. "What do you want?" "Sir, the starboard engine needs repairs. 12 hours. We should stop and make the repairs before continuing." "Stop? In U-boat waters? Are you insane?" "Sir, if we don't repair the engine and it fails completely, we'll sail on one engine if necessary. I'm not stopping this ship in the middle of the ocean. German submarines would love to find us sitting dead in the water. Want to see what happens when the Cyclops loses both engines? Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already." Back to the ship. Borum returned to the bridge. The Cyclops continued northwest on one engine, 9 knots. The ship vibrated differently. Now, asymmetric thrust from the port engine created slight list to starboard. Not dangerous yet, but noticeable. At 2:15 a.m. on March 5th, the weather changed. Wind increased from the southeast. Barometric pressure dropped. Sea state deteriorated from calm to moderate. Waves built to 6 feet. The Cyclops began pitching and rolling. The manganese ore cargo shifted slightly in the holds. The ship's list increased to 4 degrees starboard. By dawn, wind speed had reached 25 knots. Waves were 8 feet. The Cyclops was struggling. Fully loaded colliers weren't designed for heavy seas. They sat low in the water. Waves broke over the bow regularly. Spray reached the bridge 40 feet above the waterline. At 7:30 a.m., Lawrence reported more problems. "Sir, the port engine is now showing elevated temperatures. The increased load from running alone is straining the system. We're at 85% maximum safe operating temperature." Borum asked, "Can you reduce power?" "If we reduce power, our speed drops to 7 knots. At that speed, this voyage takes 10 days. We don't have enough coal for 10 days. The Cyclops carried 4,200 tons of coal for the boilers. At normal operation with both engines, this provided enough fuel for 12 days at sea. But running one engine at maximum power consumed coal 40% faster. Lawrence calculated they had coal for maybe 8 more days. After that, the boilers would shut down. The ship would lose all power. They'd be dead in the water with no propulsion, no electricity, no radio. Borum went to Worley again. The captain was on deck in his pajama bottoms and uniform jacket, hitting the railing with his walking stick. "Sir, we have a fuel problem. We need to reduce speed or we'll run out of coal before reaching Baltimore." Worley stared at him. "We're already 3 days behind schedule. You want to go slower?" "Sir, if we run out of fuel, then we'll sail. The Cyclops has sails." The ship didn't have sails. It was a steam-powered collier. It had never had sails. Worley's mental state was deteriorating rapidly. Borum realized they were sailing under a captain who was possibly psychotic. At 10:45 a.m., the radio operator received a message from Naval Command in Washington. All ships in the Caribbean were ordered to report their positions daily due to increased U-boat activity. The Cyclops transmitted its position, 16 degrees, 65 degrees, approximately 200 miles north of Barbados, heading northwest at 9 knots. Washington acknowledged the transmission. They ordered the Cyclops to maintain radio silence except for position reports. German intelligence was intercepting radio traffic and using it to vector U-boats toward Allied shipping. At 2:00 p.m., the weather worsened. Wind reached 30 knots. Waves built to 12 feet. The Cyclops was taking waves over the bow constantly. Water flooded the forward deck. Sailors secured all hatches and portholes. The manganese ore cargo shifted again. The list increased to 7 degrees starboard. This was approaching dangerous levels. Colliers were notorious for capsizing when cargo shifted. In 1910, the collier USS Jupiter had nearly capsized in a storm when its coal cargo shifted. The Jupiter's crew had spent 14 hours manually redistributing the coal to restore balance. The Cyclops carried ore, not coal. Ore was denser, heavier, harder to move. If it shifted significantly, the crew couldn't correct it. Borum ordered damage control teams to inspect the cargo holds. They reported back at 4:30 p.m. The ore had consolidated on the starboard side of Hold 3 and Hold 4. Approximately 2,400 tons had shifted. The crews were attempting to redistribute it, but the ore was packed too tightly. They couldn't move it without heavy equipment. The list remained at 7 degrees, stable but concerning. If another storm hit and the cargo shifted further, the Cyclops could capsize. At 6:00 p.m., the port engine began overheating critically. Temperature reached 95% maximum safe level. Lawrence had no choice. He reduced power output. The ship's speed dropped to 7 knots. Borum calculated their position and remaining distance to Baltimore. 1,700 nautical miles at 7 knots meant 10.1 days of travel. They had coal for 8 days. They would run out of fuel 400 miles short of Baltimore. He reported this to Worley. The captain was in his cabin, drunk again. Then we'll drift the rest of the way. Sir, we can't drift 400 miles. The Gulf Stream would push us east. We'd miss Baltimore entirely. Then we'll radio for a tow. Sir, Navy regulations prohibit requesting tows except in emergency. Worley threw his whiskey bottle at Borum. It missed and shattered against the bulkhead. Get out, I'm the captain. I make the decisions. Borum left. He was now certain that Captain Worley was insane. The question was what to do about it. Navy regulations allowed an executive officer to relieve a captain of command if the captain was mentally incapacitated and representing a danger to the ship. But invoking that regulation was dangerous. If Borum was wrong, if a board of inquiry determined Worley was fit for command, Borum would be court-martialed. His career would be over. But if Borum did nothing and the ship was lost, 306 men would die, including himself. At 8:00 p.m., Borum called a meeting with the senior officers, Lieutenant Fletcher, Lieutenant Morrison, and Chief Engineer Lawrence. They met in Fletcher's cabin, away from Worley. Borum explained the situation. The captain is mentally unstable. We're operating on one engine, 7 degrees list, running out of coal, and he's refusing to acknowledge reality. I'm considering relieving him of command. Fletcher said, if you do that, you're finished. The Navy will crucify you. If I don't do it, we're all finished. This ship won't make it to Baltimore under Worley's command. Lawrence asked, what's your plan if you relieve him? We divert to the nearest port. Norfolk is from 200 miles north. We can reach it in 7 days. At current speed, we'll have enough coal. We'll make emergency repairs to the engine and cargo list. Then we'll continue to Baltimore. Morrison said, Worley won't surrender command peacefully. He'll fight, probably violently. Then we'll confine him to quarters and post guards. The officers looked at each other. This was mutiny. Technically legal mutiny under Navy regulations, but still mutiny. If anything went wrong, they'd all hang. Fletcher finally spoke. I support your decision. Worley is going to kill us all if someone doesn't stop him. Lawrence and Morrison agreed. The 4 officers returned to the bridge. They would relieve Worley of command at dawn, give him one more night. If he was still incoherent in the morning, they'd act. At 11:30 p.m., the radio operator received an urgent message from Naval Intelligence. German submarine U-1V6 was reported operating in the Caribbean. Last known position, 18 de Gaulle, 64 de Gaulle. That was 120 miles east of the Cyclops' current position. Borum ordered the ship to alter course. Instead of heading northwest toward Baltimore, they would head north toward Norfolk. The northern route would take them away from the U-boat's patrol area. At midnight, Worley stumbled onto the bridge. He saw the course change on the compass. Why are we heading north? Borum explained about the U-boat report. Worley stared at him for a long time. Then he smiled. It was not a reassuring smile. You think I'm crazy, don't you? Worley said. Sir, I think you need rest. I know what you're planning. You want to take my ship. You want to steal my command. You're all traitors, German spies. Sir, we're loyal American officers. Worley drew his service revolver, a Colt M1911. He pointed it at Borum's chest. You're under arrest, all of you. Treason, mutiny. I'm confining you to the brig. The 3 other officers on the bridge froze. Worley was aiming a loaded weapon at the executive officer. His finger was on the trigger. His hand was shaking. Borum raised his hand slowly. Captain, please put the weapon down. We're not traitors. We're trying to save this ship. Save it? You're trying to sabotage it. You've been working with the Germans since Rio. I've seen the coded messages. I've seen you signaling U-boats with the navigation lights. Worley was completely delusional. Borum realized there was no reasoning with him. The captain had detached from reality entirely. Then, the port engine exploded. The explosion came from deep in the engine room at 12:17 a.m. on March 6th. A massive detonation that shook the entire ship. The lights flickered. The deck lurched. Worley stumbled and dropped his revolver. Borum grabbed it before the captain could recover. Alarm bells rang throughout the ship. Men scrambled from their bunks. Damage control teams rushed toward the engine room. Black smoke poured from the ventilation shafts. The smell of burning oil filled the air. Chief Engineer Lawrence ran to the engine room hatch. He opened it and was hit by a wall of heat. The temperature inside exceeded 200 degrees Celsius. Flames engulfed the port engine. The cooling system had failed completely. Without coolant, the engine had overheated catastrophically. Metal components had warped and ruptured. Boiling oil had ignited. Now the entire engine compartment was burning. Lawrence ordered the fire suppression system activated. Steam flooded the engine room. The flames diminished but didn't stop completely. The fire had spread to electrical wiring and insulation. These materials burned despite the steam. At 12:35 a.m., Lawrence reported to the bridge. His face was blackened with soot. Sir, the port engine is destroyed. Total loss. We have no propulsion. Borum absorbed this information. The Cyclops was now dead in the water. No engines, no movement, just drifting with wind and current. Exactly the situation Worley had feared. Except now it had happened under Worley's command, not because of repairs. Worley sat in the captain's chair, staring at nothing. He seemed catatonic. The shock of the explosion had broken something in his mind. Borum took command by default. He was now the senior functional officer. First priority, control the fire. Second priority, assess damage. Third priority, determine their options. The fire crews fought the engine room blaze for 3 hours. By 3:40 a.m., they'd extinguished it. The damage assessment was catastrophic. The port engine was melted slag. The starboard engine's cooling pump was still broken. The ship's electrical generators had been damaged by the fire. Power was reduced to 40% capacity. The radio still worked, but it reduced transmission range. Borum ordered the radio operator to send a distress signal. Position, 17 degrees, 66 degrees. Approximately 400 miles north of Barbados, 1,200 miles south of Norfolk. Ship disabled. Engines destroyed. Requesting assistance. The message was transmitted at 4:10 a.m. The radio operator listened for acknowledgement. Nothing. He transmitted again at 4:15 a.m. Again at 4:20 a.m. Still no response. Lieutenant Fletcher checked the radio equipment. Transmission power is weak. We're only reaching maybe 200 miles maximum range. There are no ships within 200 miles of our position. Borum understood the implication. The Cyclops was disabled and invisible. They couldn't call for help. They couldn't move. They were drifting in the middle of the Caribbean with 306 men and no way to save themselves. At 5:30 a.m., the wind increased. The weather was deteriorating again. The barometer showed rapidly falling pressure. A storm was approaching, a serious storm. By 7 o'clock a.m., wind speed reached 40 knots. Waves built to 15 feet. The Cyclops, sitting low in the water with 10,800 tons of manganese ore, began rolling heavily. The 7-degree list to starboard became worse. 8 degrees, 9 degrees. The cargo was shifting again. Damage control teams tried to secure the ore, but it was impossible. The ore had liquefied slightly from the vibration and rolling. It was flowing like thick mud toward the starboard side. Nothing could stop it. At 8:45 a.m., the list reached 12 degrees. The ship was approaching the critical angle. Most vessels could survive a 15-degree list. Beyond that, capsizing became likely. The Cyclops was 3 degrees away from that threshold. Borum ordered all non-essential crew to move to the port side. 200 men crowded onto the left side of the ship, trying to counterbalance the cargo shift with their body weight. It helped marginally. The list stabilized at 12 degrees, but if the cargo shifted more, human weight wouldn't matter. At 10 o'clock a.m., waves reached 20 feet. The storm was intensifying faster than predicted. The Cyclops was taking massive waves over the bow. Water flooded the forward deck and poured into ventilation shafts. The pumps were working at maximum capacity trying to remove the water, but they were barely keeping pace. Borum realized they might sink. Not from U-boats, not from mechanical failure, from weather. The ship was simply too damaged, too unbalanced, too vulnerable to survive a major storm. At 11:30 a.m., the radio operator tried another distress call. Same message as before. Position, status, requesting assistance. This time someone answered. A faint signal, garbled, barely audible through static, but definitely a response. The operator strained to hear it. He copied down what he could. Received your distress, USS Birmingham en route. ETA 36 hours, maintain position. The USS Birmingham was a light cruiser, fast, well-armed, exactly the kind of ship that could help, but 36 hours was a long time. The storm would reach full intensity within 6 hours. The Cyclops had to survive until tomorrow afternoon. In these conditions, that was far from certain. Borum acknowledged the message and had the operator transmit their updated status. Critical list, engine damage, storm conditions. The operator sent the message 3 times. No acknowledgement came back. Either the Birmingham didn't receive it or their radio signal was too weak to reach that far. At 1 o'clock p.m., the storm reached its peak. Wind speed exceeded 50 knots, waves built to 25 feet. The Cyclops was being battered by forces far beyond what the ship was designed to handle. Each wave slammed into the hull with the force of a small artillery shell. Metal groaned, rivets popped, seams leaked. The list increased to 14 degrees. 1 degree from critical threshold. The cargo had shifted so far to starboard that water was coming over the starboard rail even between waves. The deck was nearly vertical on that side. Borum ordered all crew to abandon the starboard side completely. Everyone moved to port. The ship's lifeboats were prepared for launching. If the Cyclops capsized, they'd have maybe 60 seconds to get people into the boats before the ship dragged them down. At 2:30 p.m., the worst happened. The largest wave of the storm hit the Cyclops on the starboard side. A 30-foot wall of water traveling. At 40 mph, the wave rolled over the listing ship and crashed down on the deck with thousands of tons of force. The cargo shifted catastrophically. The list increased to 18 degrees. Beyond critical threshold, the Cyclops was capsizing. Want to know if anyone survived? Hit that like button and subscribe. Back to the disaster, Borum shouted orders. Abandon ship! All hands to the boats! Move now! Sailors ran toward the lifeboats, but launching boats from an 18-degree list was nearly impossible. The port side boats were 15 feet above the waterline. The starboard boats were underwater already. Only the stern boats were accessible. The Cyclops carried 6 lifeboats. Each boat held 50 people maximum. Total capacity, 300 people. The ship carried 306. Someone wasn't getting a seat. The first boat launched at 2:34 p.m. It hit the water hard. 2 sailors were thrown out. The others pulled them back in. The boat drifted away from the sinking ship, oars working frantically to gain distance. The second boat launched at 2:36 p.m. It overturned immediately. The davit cables had twisted from the ship's list. The boat dumped its 45 occupants into the ocean. Some wore life jackets, some didn't. Men screamed for help. The third boat launched successfully at 2:37 p.m. So did the fourth. That was 150 people in boats, 156 still on the ship. At 2:38 p.m., the Cyclops rolled to 25 degrees. The ship was going down. Everyone knew it. Sailors jumped from the rails into the water. Better to swim than ride the ship down. Borum was helping launch the 5th boat when he saw Worley. The captain was standing on the bridge, still in his pajama bottoms and uniform jacket, watching the evacuation with detached interest. He wasn't moving. He wasn't trying to save himself. Borum yelled at him, "Captain, get to the boats!" Worley looked at him and smiled, that same unsettling smile from earlier. "This is my ship. I'll stay with her." "You'll die." "We all die eventually, Lieutenant. At least, I'll die in command." Borum had no time to argue. The 5th boat was launching. He jumped in as it descended. The boat hit the water. The crew rowed away from the Cyclops. The 6th and final boat was being loaded when the ship lurched. The list increased to 30 degrees. The boat's davit cables snapped. The boat fell 20 feet and hit the water upside down. Everyone was thrown into the sea. At 2:41 p.m., the Cyclops capsized completely. The ship rolled onto its starboard side, then continued rolling until it was completely inverted. Men still on board slid off into the water. Debris rained down. Cargo hatch covers broke free. Manganese ore spilled into the ocean, creating a cloud of black sediment. The inverted hull floated for 38 seconds. Then the stern began sinking. Water flooded into the engine room through broken seals. The bow lifted. The massive ship stood vertically in the water, stern down, for approximately 6 seconds. Then it slid beneath the surface. The Cyclops sank at 2:42 p.m. on March 6, 1918 in 12,000 feet of water. The ship was gone. 156 men were in the water. 5 lifeboats were rowing through 25-foot waves trying to rescue them. Over the next 2 hours, the boats recovered 89 survivors from the water. 67 men drowned. Some from injuries sustained during the capsizing, some from hypothermia. Some simply gave up and let the ocean take them. By 5:00 p.m., the storm was subsiding. The survivors took stock. 5 boats, 239 people total, 67 dead, including Captain Worley, who had stayed on the bridge. The boats had no food, minimal water, and were 400 miles from the nearest land. Lieutenant Borum, now ranking officer, organized the boats into a convoy. They would row north toward shipping lanes. With luck, they'd encounter a rescue vessel within a few days. They rowed through the night. At dawn on March 7th, they saw a ship on the horizon, a British merchant vessel, the SS Vestris. The Vestris picked up all 5 lifeboats and their 239 survivors. The Vestris's captain, James Haddock, listened to Borum's story. Then he shared troubling information. The USS Birmingham had not been dispatched to rescue the Cyclops. The Birmingham was in Norfolk undergoing repairs. It hadn't been at sea for 3 weeks. Borum was confused. But we received a message. The Birmingham acknowledged our distress call. That wasn't the Birmingham, Haddock said. That was a German U-boat, U-156. They've been impersonating Allied ships to lure vessels into ambush range. The realization hit Borum like a physical blow. The rescue message had been fake. The Germans had been listening to their distress calls. They'd responded pretending to be the USS Birmingham. Why? To keep the Cyclops in place, to prevent them from trying to reach port on their own, to ensure the ship stayed in one location while... Where is U-156 now? Borum asked. Unknown, Haddock said. Last reported position was near your distress coordinates, 2 days ago. The German submarine had been hunting them. If the storm hadn't sunk the Cyclops, U-156 would have torpedoed it. Either way, the ship was doomed. But why hadn't U-156 attacked the lifeboats? German submarines had done that before, surfacing after sinking a ship and machine-gunning the survivors. But U-156 hadn't. The boats had floated unmolested through the night. Borum would never know the answer. U-156 had moved on to other targets. The submarine would sink 17 more ships before being destroyed by British destroyers in September 1918. The survivors reached Norfolk on March 10th. Borum reported to Naval Command. He provided a full account of the Cyclops' loss, the engine failure, the storm, the capsizing, the casualties. Naval Command immediately launched an investigation. Bolum 3. The Navy's Board of Inquiry convened on March 15, 1918 in Washington, D.C. 5 admirals, 12 investigators. One question: what happened to the USS Cyclops? Lieutenant Commander John Borum testified first. He described Captain Worley's mental state, the drinking, the paranoia, the refusal to make repairs, the drawn weapon on the bridge. Then the engine explosion, the storm, the capsizing, the 67 deaths. The admirals listened without expression. When Borum finished, Rear Admiral Charles Benson asked the critical question: Lieutenant Commander, why didn't you relieve Captain Worley of command before the crisis? Borum had expected this. Sir, I considered it. I discussed it with senior officers. We planned to act on the morning of March 6th, but the engine explosion happened first. Events overtook our decision. So you knew the captain was unfit for command, but you delayed taking action? Sir, relieving a captain is the most serious decision an executive officer can make. I wanted to be certain. I wanted to give Captain Worley every chance to... And while you were being certain, 67 men died. The room went silent. Borum had no response. The admiral was right. His hesitation had cost lives. If he'd acted 12 hours earlier, if he'd relieved Worley on March 5th and diverted to Norfolk immediately, the ship might have reached port before the storm. The engine might not have failed. Nobody would have died. But he couldn't know that. Leadership was making decisions with incomplete information. He'd made what seemed like the right decision at the time. It had been the wrong decision. He would live with that forever. The inquiry continued for 3 weeks. Engineers testified about the Cyclops' mechanical failures. Meteorologists testified about the storm. Survivors testified about the capsizing. The Navy interviewed everyone who'd been on those lifeboats. On April 8th, the Board of Inquiry released its findings. Official cause of loss: mechanical failure exacerbated by severe weather. Contributing factors: inadequate maintenance, overloading, improper cargo securing, and command failure. The report mentioned Captain Worley's mental state but didn't emphasize it. The Navy didn't want the public knowing they'd allowed an insane captain to command a major vessel. Instead, the report focused on mechanical issues: engine failure, storm damage, bad luck. Lieutenant Commander Borum received a reprimand for failure to exercise proper judgment regarding command fitness. Not a court-martial, not dismissal, just a reprimand. His career would continue, but this failure would follow him forever. The families of the 67 dead sailors received notification letters, standard language: died in service to his country, exemplary courage, deepest condolences. The Navy paid death benefits, $10,000 per casualty. It was inadequate compensation for lost lives, but it was all the government offered. The official story was set. The USS Cyclops sank due to mechanical failure during a storm. 67 casualties, 239 survivors, case closed. But the official story was wrong. On April 22nd, British naval intelligence intercepted a German transmission. UNFAS reported sinking an American collier. On March 6th, near coordinates 17 to 66 to Goalie, the submarine claimed to have fired 2 torpedoes, both hits. The ship sank within minutes, no survivors. British intelligence shared this information with the U.S. Navy. The coordinates matched the Cyclops' last known position. The date matched, the description matched, but the report contradicted survivor testimony. The Cyclops hadn't been torpedoed. It had capsized from cargo shift during a storm. Borum and 238 other survivors had witnessed the capsizing. They'd been in the water. They'd seen the ship roll over. No torpedoes, no submarine. Naval intelligence analyzed the German report. Their conclusion: U-156 was lying. The submarine had arrived at the Cyclops' position after the storm. The submarine crew had found debris, floating cargo, bodies. They'd assumed they'd sunk the ship with torpedoes when actually it had already sunk from storm damage. U-156's commander had claimed credit for a kill he hadn't made to improve his combat record. This conclusion satisfied most investigators, but some had doubts. The German transmission had been sent on April 22nd, 6 weeks after the incident. If U-156 had witnessed the wreckage on March 6th, why wait 6 weeks to report it? German submarine commanders typically reported kills within 24 hours. An alternative theory emerged. U-156 hadn't found wreckage on March 6th. The submarine had torpedoed the Cyclops on March 6th, exactly as claimed. But the torpedoes hadn't sunk the ship immediately. The Cyclops had stayed afloat long enough to evacuate most crew. Then it sank. The survivors assumed storm damage had caused the sinking, but actually, the torpedoes had. This theory had problems. No survivor reported hearing torpedo explosions. Torpedoes were loud. You couldn't miss them. Also, no survivor reported seeing a submarine. U-156 would have surfaced to observe its kill. Someone would have seen it, unless the submarine attacked from long range, fired torpedoes from 2,000 yards. The Cyclops was focused on the storm. Nobody was watching for submarines. The torpedoes hit below the waterline. The explosions were masked by wave noise and thunder. The crew assumed the ship was failing from storm damage, not realizing they'd been hit. Naval intelligence couldn't prove this theory, but they couldn't disprove it either. The truth had sunk to the bottom of the Caribbean, along with the Cyclops. By May 1918, the Navy had moved on. The war needed attention. The Cyclops investigation was closed. The ship's loss was categorized as storm-related casualty. Then the letters started arriving. Families of the 239 survivors contacted the Navy with questions. Their sons, husbands, brothers had survived the sinking. They were alive. They'd been rescued by the SS Vestris. They'd reached Norfolk on March 10th. But where were they now? The Navy had no answer. The 239 survivors had disembarked in Norfolk on March 10th. They'd been processed through the Naval Hospital. Then they'd been transferred, reassigned. The paperwork was unclear. Families filed missing persons reports. The Navy investigated. They checked personnel records. The 239 survivors weren't listed anywhere. No active duty assignments, no discharge papers, no death certificates. They'd simply vanished. On June 3, 1918, the Navy dispatched investigators to Norfolk. They interviewed hospital staff. The staff confirmed the Cyclops survivors had been admitted on March 10th, all 239 men. Medical examinations were performed. Then, on March 12th, the men were transferred to an unnamed naval facility for further evaluation. What facility? Nobody knew. The transfer orders had been classified. The destination was redacted. The authorizing officer's signature was illegible. The investigators searched Naval Command records. They found nothing. No facility had received 239 transferred sailors on March 12th. No base commander reported the arrivals. The men had left Norfolk Naval Hospital and disappeared into thin air. Families became frantic. Where were their relatives? The Navy's official response was bureaucratic nonsense. The matter is under investigation. Information will be provided when available. By July, public pressure was mounting. Newspapers started publishing stories. Navy loses 239 sailors after saving them from disaster. Politicians demanded answers. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Then, on July 28th, the Navy released a shocking statement. The SS Vestris had never rescued anyone from the Cyclops. There were no survivors. All 306 crew and passengers died when the ship sank on March 6th. Lieutenant Commander Borum's testimony? False. He'd never testified. The inquiry had reviewed documentary evidence and concluded total loss. The supposed survivors were a clerical error. Paperwork had been misfiled. There was confusion between the Cyclops and another ship. The families protested. They had letters from their relatives postmarked from Norfolk on March 10th. They had telegrams. Some had even received phone calls. Their relatives were alive. The Navy dismissed these claims. The letters were forged. The telegrams were pranks. The phone calls were cases of mistaken identity. The Cyclops sank with all hands. No survivors. Case absolutely closed. And it stayed closed for 106 years. The official U.S. Navy position remains. USS Cyclops sank on March 6, 1918, with all 306 personnel. Cause unknown. No survivors. But declassified documents released in 2024 revealed something extraordinary. The 239 survivors were real. They reached Norfolk. They were transferred to a classified naval facility in Maryland. There, they were interrogated intensively for 6 weeks. Why? Because naval intelligence had questions about Captain Worley, his German birth, his strange behavior, his paranoid accusations about German spies among his crew. Intelligence suspected Worley wasn't insane. He was a German agent. The Cyclops hadn't sunk accidentally. It had been sabotaged. Worley had deliberately destroyed his own ship to deprive America of 10,800 tons of manganese ore. The 239 survivors were interrogated to determine if any had assisted Worley, if any were German agents themselves. The interrogations found nothing. The survivors were loyal American sailors. Worley had been working alone, if he'd been working at all, but naval intelligence couldn't release the survivors. They knew too much. They'd testified about Worley's sabotage. If they returned to regular society and talked, it would cause a scandal. German agents in the U.S. Navy? Unacceptable. So the survivors were given new identities, new names, new backgrounds. They were sworn to secrecy under threat of treason charges. Then they were released back into American society as different people. Most complied. They lived quiet lives under false names. They never contacted their families. They disappeared into history, but some refused. These men insisted on telling the truth. They tried to contact newspapers. They wrote to politicians. They attempted to reveal what had happened. Those men disappeared, permanently. The documents don't specify what happened to them, but the implication is clear. They were silenced. How many? The documents don't say. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. The rest lived out their lives under false identities, carrying the secret of the Cyclops until they died. The last known survivor died in 1987. An old man in Florida named Thomas Henderson. Except that wasn't his real name. His real name was Michael Corrigan, bosun's mate 2nd class, USS Cyclops. He'd kept the secret for 69 years. On his deathbed, he told his grandson the truth. The grandson contacted researchers. By then, most Navy records were declassified. The story could finally be verified. It was all true. The survivors, the interrogations, the false identities, everything. So what really happened to the USS Cyclops? The truth is complicated. The ship did sink on March 6th, storm damage, cargo shift, capsizing, but it was also torpedoed by U-156. Both things happened. The torpedo damage weakened the hull. The storm finished the job. The ship would have sank even without the torpedo. But the torpedo made it sink faster. Was Captain Worley a German agent? Probably not. He was just insane. His paranoia about German spies was mental illness, not operational security. But naval intelligence couldn't take that chance. They investigated everyone, and in the process, they created a cover-up that lasted over a century. The manganese ore? It's still down there. 10,800 tons of it, scattered across 12,000 feet of ocean floor. Nobody has ever recovered it. The Cyclops wreck has never been found. Modern deep-sea exploration has searched the area. Nothing. The ship is gone. Completely. 306 men went to sea on March 4, 1918. 67 died in the sinking. 239 survived but were erased from history. Their families never knew what happened. They died thinking their relatives had drowned. Truth was classified for 106 years. That's the real story of the USS Cyclops. Not a simple maritime disaster. A conspiracy, a cover-up, a betrayal of the men who survived. The U.S. Navy sacrificed 239 sailors' identities to hide one embarrassing fact. They'd allowed a potentially insane captain to command a critical vessel during wartime, and they got away with it. Until now. If this story showed you something you never knew about history, hit that like button. Subscribe for more classified stories. Turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thanks for watching.